Suppose I show you two electrode materials and both charge quickly and both can give a fairly capacitor-like electrochemical response. But in one material, no redox reaction is required. In the another, an actual chemical electron transfer process is taking place. Then are both simply capacitors? And this is where the supercapacitor terminology becomes very interesting. In the previous video, we show that an electric double layer can store charge without a redox reaction. So the ions rearrange at the electrode-electrolyte interface and the charge is stored mainly through the electrostatic attraction. But today the situation changes. So because chemistry can also become extremely fast enough that a Faradaic processes, meaning a process that involve electron transfer and a oxidation reduction reaction which can begin to look electrochemically like a capacitor, and that behavior is what we call pseudocapacitance. And this word create a lot of confusion because once we see a redox peak, there is a temptation to call the material pseudocapacitive, but that is not necessarily correct. Today we will separate three different situations. The first one is electric double layer storage, where the ions are adsorbed electrostatically, and second, pseudocapacitive storage, where the Faradaic chemistry occurs, but the kinetics remain very fast. And the third is battery type behavior, where the charge storage becomes more strongly controlled by the processes occurring inside the bulk of the material. So the central question throughout this video is very simple. Where is the charge being stored? And how difficult is it for that charge storage process to occur? Once we answer these questions, the difference between a capacitor and a pseudocapacitor and battery type behavior becomes much clearer. So let us first remove one major misunderstanding, that pseudocapacitance is not another name of double layer capacitance. So in an ideal electric double layer, charge storage is electrostatic and non-Faradaic. So there is no electron transfer redox reaction required. Now move to the middle. In pseudocapacitance, a Faradaic process is definitely present. Electrons participate in the charge storage reactions. But here is the important part. The reaction is sufficiently fast that the electrochemical response can still remain strongly capacitor-like. So the chemistry is real, but the kinetics are fast. Now compare that with the third case. In strongly battery type behavior, ions generally have to move more extensively into the material, or reactions proceed inside the bulk. Diffusion and phase related processes can become much more important. In a simple way of imagining this is to think about entering a building. In an EDLC, people gather near the entrance. In the surface pseudocapacitance, a very fast transaction happens right around the entrance. In intercalation pseudocapacitance, people enter accessible spaces inside the building, but movement is still unusually fast. In strongly battery type storage, they may have to travel much deeper through the building. Now, the distance and transport become more important. The analogy is not the mechanism itself. Of course, it simply tells us why location and transport length matter. So remember this statement. Pseudocapacitance is not pure electrostatic. It is fast Faradaic charge storage. That one distinction will guide almost everything that follows. Before moving into the pseudocapacitance, let us use EDLC as our reference point. And I will keep this short because we have already discussed the electric double layer in detail. In an ideal EDLC, charge is stored by electrostatic ion adsorption at electrode-electrolyte interface. The ions rearrange, the electrode becomes charged, but the electrode material itself does not need to undergo a redox transformation. And that is why we call ideal EDLC storage is non-Faradic. Its electrochemical response can be very rapid because we are not asking ions to perform a slow bulk transformation inside the active material. And for an ideal double layer system, capacitance is appropriate primary quantity for describing charge storage behavior. This now gives us our baseline. No redox reaction means EDLC. But what happens when an electron transfer reaction does occur while the system still responds very rapidly? And that takes us to the first major form of pseudocapacitance. So this is surface redox pseudocapacitance. Now chemistry enters the picture. Charge is stored through fast and reversible electron transfer reactions occurring at or close to the surface of material. So, unlike EDLC behavior, this is Faradaic. A redox reaction is involved. But notice where it happens. Mainly at the surface or near surface region, because the process does not depend strongly on ions traveling over long distances through the larger particles. The response can remain very fast, and this combination is the key. Faraday chemistry, but capacitor like kinetics. So, electrochemically, the cyclic voltammogram, or you can say CV, may therefore show a broad redox feature rather than a very sharp redox peaks. More commonly, which is associated with a strongly battery type behavior. And the deck gives commonly cited example such as ruthenium oxide and some of manganese oxide, RuO2 or MnO2 systems. But the important lesson is not simply the memorize a list of materials, but the mechanism is more important than the material's name. If we observe electron transfer, high reversibility and a response that remains largely capacitive at high rate, surface redox pseudocapacitance may be relevant. So, compared with EDLC, one fundamental thing has changed. In EDLC, ion rearrange without recurring an electrode redox transformation. But here, actual electron transfer chemistry contributes directly to the stored charge. Still, the process remains fast enough to retain the capacitor-like behavior. This is why the term contains the word pseudo. It produces capacitance-like behavior, or you can say capacitor-like behavior, but its physical origin is not simply the electrostatic double layer. Now we comes an even more interesting situation. Someone may say, fine, surface reactions can be fast, but once ions start entering the crystal structure, surely that becomes a battery, but not always. This is where the intercalation pseudocapacitance becomes important. Intercalation simply means the ions enter available sites within a host structure. Here, the charge storage is again Faradic, but the structure provides sufficiently accessible pathways, or you can say active sites, that the ion storage process can remain fast. And therefore, ion insertion alone does not automatically means slow battery behavior. The important question is whether the response is dominated by slow, long range diffusion and major battery like phase behavior. In intercalation pseudocapacitance, that strong limitation is not dominant. The slide gives orthorhombic NB2O5 as a classic literature example. So what makes this type of behavior pseudocapacitive? So three ideas come together. The ion transport is fast. There is no dominant two-phase battery plateau, and Faradaic storage can still operate at high rate. So we have now moved from outer surface into structurally accessible internal sites, but without automatically sacrificing fast kinetics. Think again about our building example. Surface-redox pseudocapacitance is like a very fast interaction near the entrance. So intercalation pseudocapacitance allows movements into accessible internal spaces, but the routes are sufficiently favorable that the system does not become dominated by slow transport. And this is why simply asking, are these uh, are ions entering the materials is not enough. We also need to ask, how fast are they moving and what controls the electrochemical response. Now let us move to the other side of the spectrum. In strongly battery type behavior, ions insert into or react within the bulk of the active material. Here, the transport distance and internal reaction processes become much more important, and diffusion length matters. Movement of phase boundaries may matter, and compared with highly capacitive response, kinetics become more strongly limited by what is happening inside the solid. So electrochemical signatures therefore tend to become different. The CV may show sharper redox peaks, and in galvanostatic charge discharge, or you can say GCD, the voltage profile can develop more obvious plateau regions. A plateau means that over part of the charge and discharge process, the voltage changes relatively slow while significant charge is transferred. The important practical point on this slide concerns the matrix. When behavior becomes strongly battery-like, reporting everything simply as a capacitance can become misleading. For strongly battery-type materials, capacity, often expressed in milliampere hours per gram, can be a more appropriate quantity. The examples for this type of material is LiFePO4 and nickel hydroxide type behavior. Again, the purpose is not to create rigid boxes around every material. The purpose is to understand what is controlling the charge storage. If bulk insertion or bulk redox becomes strongly diffusion controlled and the response begins to show clear battery like characteristics, we should describe the mechanism accordingly. So the difference between the intercalation pseudocapacitance and battery type insertion is not simply ion outside versus ion inside. Both may involve ions enter a structure or entering a structure. The decisive issue is kinetics and the degree of diffusion control. Let us put everything together. So this slide is probably the most useful comparison in the entire video. Start with the EDLC. So charge is concentrated mainly at the electrode electrolyte interface. The ideal CV tends toward a rectangular shape, and the ideal GCD curve tends towards a symmetric, nearly linear triangle. This is our highly capacitive reference. Now, surface redox pseudocapacitance. Here, the charge storage includes fast Faradaic reactions at or close to the surface, and the CV can remain broadly capacitor-like but may contain broad redox features, and the GCD response may therefore become somewhat curved rather than perfectly linear. Now, intercalation pseudocapacitance. Ions move into accessible near surface or lattice sites. The CV can show broader peaks, and the behavior contain both capacitive and diffusion related contributions. Finally, the strong battery type storage. Here, the charge storage process extends much more strongly into the bulk. So sharp redox peaks and longer plateau regions become more characteristics, and diffusion control becomes more important. So the shapes are giving us the clues. but shapes alone should not become labels. A useful kinetic relation shown on this slide is I equals to A V to the power B. Here I is the current and V is the scan rate, or V, or you can say mu. The exponent B provides a kinetic guide. A value which is approaching to 1 suggests behavior dominated more strongly by capacitive processes, and a value approaching zero point 0.5 suggests a stronger diffusion controlled contribution. Notice the wording. This is kinetic guide. We should not take one number and ignore the rest of the electrochemistry. This is why the mechanism identification normally needs several pieces of evidence together: the CV behavior, GCD, the rate response, and kinetic analysis. The useful question is therefore not does my CV have a peak? The useful question is where is charge stored and how does the current respond when I change the experimental rate? And that gives us much strong mechanistics basis than judging the material from one curve alone. So at this point, you may ask, why are we spending so much time on terminology? Because terminology changes how we investigate the data. The first warning is very important. Not every redox peak means pseudocapacitance. A redox peak tells us that a Faradaic reaction is involved. It does not by itself prove that the reaction has pseudocapacitive kinetics. This distinction becomes particularly important when researchers compare rate performance. If strongly battery type behavior is labeled pseudocapacitive without sufficient kinetic evidence, the investigation of rate capability can become exaggerated, and the metric must also follow the mechanism. For genuinely capacitive responses, capacitance is appropriate. When strongly battery like behavior dominates, capacity may be the more meaningful quantity. Now, look at the decision pathway on the right. First question: is the process Faradaic? If there is no redox electron transfer, we are not discussing Faradaic pseudocapacitance. Next, is the response fast and largely capacitive? Then, are strong diffusion limitations absent or only minor? So, if these conditions are supported experimentally, so describing the pseudocapacitive behavior becomes more plausible. And if strong bulk diffusion dominates, battery type behavior should be considered, and mechanism claims should not depend on a single experiment. The slide specifically points to CV, GCD, rate, data, and kinetic analysis. For claims about a practical supercapacitor device, two electrode results are also important. This is a good point for young researcher in particular. When writing a paper, terminology is not decoration. If the mechanism is classified incorrectly, the metric may also be inappropriate. The comparison with literature may become unfair, and the device expectation may become unrealistic. So, the sentence at the bottom is worth remembering. Good terminology is part of good electrochemistry. Let us now connect these mechanisms with their representative material families. For electric double layer storage, this shows the activated carbon and porous carbons. Their principal role here is electrostatic ion adsorption with strong power oriented behavior. For surface redox pseudocapacitance, representative systems can include the hydrous ruthenium oxide and some manganese oxide materials. Now, the stored charge includes the fast surface Faradaic reactions. For intercalation pseudocapacitance, the highlights is niobium oxide and related fast insertion oxides. And ions enter accessible structural site, but the kinetics can still remain highly rate capable. And finally, for strong battery type behavior, The examples such as LiFePO4 and nickel hydroxide type electrodes, where the bulk insertion or redox and diffusion control become more prominent. But there is an important warning at the bottom. Real materials are not always perfectly separated into four clean boxes. The observed mechanism can depend on the structure, particle size, electrolyte, and experimental rate. Material can therefore show mixed behavior, and the dominant contribution can change with conditions. And this is why saying this material is redox active, therefore it is pseudocapacitive, is scientifically incomplete. Redox simply tells us the electron transfer chemistry is involved. It does not tell us whether that chemistry is surface confined, fast intercalation controlled, or strongly bulk diffusion controlled. So, same word, redox, can describe very different charge storage behavior. So, let us finish with one clear framework. If charge is stored mainly through the electrostatic ion adsorption at the electrode electrolyte interface and without an electrode redox reaction, we are discussing electric double layer storage. And if the charge is stored through Faradaic chemistry, but the kinetics remain fast enough to produce strongly capacitive like behavior, we enter the world of pseudocapacitance. And that pseudocapacitance can arise from fast surface redox reactions, or it can arise through unusually fast ion intercalation into the accessible structural sites. But if charge storage becomes strongly dependent on bulk transport, diffusion length, and battery like insertion or reaction processes, then we move toward battery type behavior. So, when you look at new material, do not begin by asking, is this pseudocapacitor? Begin with a better questions. Where is the charge actually being stored? Does electron transfer occur? And how does the response change with rate? Is long range diffusion controlling the process? And do the CV, GCD, and kinetic results tell the same story? And those questions naturally lead us toward the correct mechanism. And once the mechanism is correct, the choice of metric also becomes more meaningful. That gives us more reliable comparison between materials, ultimately more realistic interpretation of device performance. So the main message from today is this: fast chemistry can behave capacitively, but not every fast looking redox response is automatically pseudocapacitance. The science lies in identifying what stores the charge and what controls its kinetics. This is real mystery behind pseudocapacitance. And once we separate those two ideas, the mystery becomes much easier to understand.